So without further ado, want to introduce the panelists. I'm hoping you'll be inspired as much as I've been working with them. Please welcome Andrew Clarke to the panel.
Hi there, Henry.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you for making this time. I know you're real busy. He's well renowned in the industry as a retail radical for turning around large enterprise operations. As president of Kmart Apparel, he turned around their $2.5 billion retail operations to double-digit growth. He was also president at Loft, a $1.6 billion brand, and CMO at Justice. I read an article on Andrew calling him out on his agile decision making, and I had the pleasure of witnessing it myself while working with him at Francesca's. He was in the trenches, in the operations, understanding what silos need to be broken, and actually being the bridge to those silos himself. It was a crazy time, and I know that without him there, it just wouldn't have gone the way it did. He takes this leading from the front style into the truth-telling company culture at Francesca's that we'd like to talk about here today. But it also extends to the marketing strategy that he calls now free to be you. And that's been behind all of the new apparel lines and campaigns that resulted from the turnaround this year. He's been profiled by CNBC during their Pride coverage of LGBTQIA leaders in business focusing on taking action. He's also an angel investor and advisory board member of the maternity startup Glow. Now I'd like to introduce Pat Turpin. Welcome to the panel. Pat is a board member, investor, and senior advisor to numerous CPG companies. He's most widely known as co-founder and pioneer of the iconic healthy chip brand Popchips. He has close to 30 years of experience leading consumer packaged goods organizations across multiple areas of the value chain. Pat was an investment banker in a previous lifetime on Wall Street before going to work for one of his clients, Costco, where he launched numerous new businesses for Costco, including Costco gas stations, which I'm a big fan and go there whenever I can. Costco's executive membership division. He also managed Costco's vertically integrated private label snack and confection packaging business. After Costco, he left to start his own a snack food brand called Popchips, which he and his co-founder built into a $100 million brand in North America and Europe. Back then, you guys probably recall as well, there weren't that many healthy snack options out there, and they definitely weren't that popular. I remember the only friends I had that would eat them had food allergies, right? It was like gluten allergies or whatnot. And everyone else was eating all the fatty good stuff. Pat made healthy snacking a mainstream thing, and I believe he did that, was able to achieve that by focusing on internal company culture, which I hope we can discuss quite a bit of today. Pat sits on the board and advises 7 different consumer product companies to help them navigate growth. He helps them on topics ranging from operations and supply chain to sales strategy and execution to building the right teams and successful culture. So let's get this started. So Andrew, you had quite a career in turning around retail operations. What made Francesca so different?
Well, thank you, Henry, for the introduction. I would say it's true, Francesca's was not the first turnaround that I'd signed up for, but the turnaround became a fight for survival within about 10 days of taking on my role as CEO. Francesca's is a specialty women's retailer and predominantly operates stores. And at the beginning of 2020, when I joined the company, we had over 700 stores across the US. And within 10 days of joining, the pandemic had started to impact, and we were beginning to close some doors. That was week 1. By week 2, all of our doors were closed across the US, and we'd lost 95% of our revenue stream. To say that Francesca's was not healthy coming into the pandemic would be a little bit of an understatement. But suffice to say, it was a pretty sobering time for myself coming in as a new CEO. And by week 3 on the job, I had my first board meeting at which our main subject was, how do we not run out of cash in the next month? And that was pretty unique for me, and not a situation that I'd come across in my career to date. But as they say, necessity is the mother of all invention, and we'll get into what we did from that point forwards in a second.
How did you prepare for that? I mean, coming from Kmart, plenty of resources, definitely things that you needed to change and turn around, but having to manage cash flow that way, I mean, that's really stressful. How did you prepare for that mentally and emotionally?
You can't prepare, I think would be the short answer. I had prepared, but I prepared for a completely different set of circumstances. I thought I was going to have my typical 100 days. This is my first appointment as a CEO, and at a public company, no less. And so I was just figuring out what the title meant after my name and all the kind of restrictions that go along with having a bunch of information about a public company that you kind of deal with. I think as things evolved in the first 2 or 3 weeks on the job, what I was beginning to realize quickly was, this was not a time to be paralyzed. This was not a time for indecision. Literally, the clock was ticking as I came into the business. And what it afforded me was a huge amount of latitude, I think, with my board, who were very clear about the fact that, we were in crisis. Would we make it out of the crisis or not really depended on what we were going to do in the ensuing days and weeks, not months or seasons. And so, I was active on the role and operational from pretty close to day one, which I have to say was a tremendous amount of fun looking back, but not for the faint-hearted.
I could imagine. And I saw you in the middle of those things. CEOs, the bigger the organization gets, the less decisions they make in a year, right? How many decisions you were making in a week during that whole pandemic situation?
Yeah, I'd be lying if I said it was all terribly organized and I wasn't flying by the seat of my pants, because actually that's exactly what we were doing. And we would have an 8 a.m. crisis meeting every single day throughout April, May, June, July. And number one point of discussion was, well, we're still here. We have not run out of cash. What did we do that staved off that situation from the day before? And we'd done some things that worked, and frankly, we did things that didn't work as well. But we tried to double down on what seemed to have gained traction with our customer. And just to, not to put too fine a point on it, but we were not an omni-channel retailer coming into the pandemic. And we became a DTC retailer overnight without the infrastructure, technology, processes, or even skill set in order to do that successfully. The only thing we did have was inventory. It was in the wrong places. It was sitting inside our boutiques across the country. And the only channel that we had was selling that inventory online. So we had to get our commodity linked with the channel that was still operating and turn that into cash pretty quickly.
Yeah. And we were in those meetings with you, and I have to say the composure that you had and the transparency that you afforded all of us made us feel really just connected to you and wanted to work with you to really overcome this. And so really enjoyed working with you there. Pat, your opportunity came up pre-pandemic. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey coming up with Popchips? Everyone, at least for me, before I met you, I imagined some, healthy food nutritionists that came up with this Popchips idea, but your journey was very different. Do you mind sharing some of that, how it all started?
Sure, Henry. Really, it started, in the early 2000s, where I was starting to see what I'd say were just undeniable trends towards wellness amongst consumers, at least in the US. But lots of food categories hadn't really made any changes towards wellness. Like you were commenting before, it was mostly your friends with something like an extreme food allergy. And snacks was a perfect example of that in food, where, most snacks tasted great, but, they'll kill you over time because they were so unhealthy. And the very few healthy options there were basically tasted like tree bark. So our idea was very simple. Can we come up with a snack that has half the fat and calories of most chips and similar snacks, but really tastes like the real thing? And if so, we would have something unique. So we actually went on a search for the right food manufacturing platform. And of all things, found a struggling rice cake manufacturer. It was losing money. The plant was in terrible condition. But the equipment that made these rice cakes could be retooled into something that was more like a potato chip in terms of its taste and texture, but it was popping it, not frying it. And so we rallied around that idea and acquired this little struggling manufacturer and converted the manufacturing capacity to really make Popchips, which we called it that because the chips were popped, not fried or baked. And just that whole concept, because it delivered on full flavor, really resonated with mainstream consumers. So we ended up turning what was a struggling $7 million private label rice cake manufacturer into a $100 million branded business in North America as well as Europe.
That brilliant move there. Who would have thought that the whole sound that is made through a different process could have changed the whole snacking industry. But it's a brilliant name. And I remember when we were talking with Andrew about this before, I remember you mentioning pop as a culture. Do you mind talking a little bit about that? The pop culture that you've created within the brand?
Sure. My partner and I were pretty adamant that we even though we thought we had a great idea, we knew we faced a lot of uphill challenges. And if we were going to achieve the kind of growth we wanted to ramp up and scale, we needed to create the right kind of culture. Because in the absence of a culture you create as the founder or leader, the employees will create a culture for you. And you may not like the one they create. So we set about creating a very clear culture. We had 8 principles. We called them the principles of pop. And it really kind of drove how we work together, how we treat each other, how we prioritize what we do day to day. And I remember distinctly the day I knew we had succeeded. It was because we were interviewing a new employee, and 3 different employees interviewed this person, and they came to me and they said, "I don't think we should hire this person." And their reasoning had nothing to do with qualifications. It was, they cited 3 different cultural pillars that this person was just not going to be able to handle. And at that point, I knew, the culture had really sunk in.
Wow. Yeah. Especially when your employees are saying that. I remember when we were talking before, you also mentioned that you asked Andrew, "Hey, did the pandemic give you permission?" Well, what was it what was behind that question?
Well, every CEO or founder or even primary investors have issues in their business that keep them up at night. So it might be things like, boy, overhead is running way higher than I thought it would be, or a growth strategy that's not coming to fruition the way you want it to. And sometimes the changes that you'd really like to make are often too drastic to implement all at once or even at all. But in a crisis, you get greater permission to make changes as part of fixing a crisis. I'll give you one example. I'm on the board of a publicly traded Canadian company that makes cutting edge equipment that's sold into the food industry, to food manufacturers. And they sold their products worldwide. And so they would have a team of installers that would travel around the world as needed to client companies to install and service equipment. It was a high fixed overhead group, and their utilization was inconsistent because of when these installations would occur. Well, fast forward to COVID. COVID hits, and you have worldwide travel restrictions. So these people were grounded. So it put the entire sales pipeline into a crisis. You can't complete the sale if you can't install the equipment for the client. So the company reacted very creatively, and they basically took advantage of the crisis to completely rethink that cost structure. And they moved from an employee-based high fixed cost installation team to a worldwide network of contract installers that created more of a variable cost structure. And this, along with some other changes they made along this, were very drastic at the time, but they not only solved the immediate problem, but they dramatically improved the company's cost structure and margins going forward. So coming out of the pandemic, their margin structure was significantly stronger than if they had just found a way to get their people to travel. And unfortunately, many more companies I see did not make those kind of imaginative changes. They made more defensive changes, and as a result, coming out of COVID weaker than they were pre-COVID.
Interesting. No, thank you for the shining the light on that. Andrew, how did the pandemic give you permission? What permission did it give you?
Well, I think the timing was very unique. For me, timing, because I was so early into my role, but also everything had to happen quickly. Right? But as I said earlier, the clock was ticking on running out of cash. And so that gave us as a company, as a leadership team, one thing, the difference between staying afloat or the end game rested upon us making sure we had enough cash. And that was incredibly clarifying, I think, for all of us. And for me, it meant that I didn't have a choice about, the sort of initiatives or strategies that I was going to lead the team to explore. We had an imperative, and that imperative was save cash or generate cash at all costs. And whilst we had opportunities around our expenses and the operation, our biggest challenge was we'd lost almost all of our revenue overnight while we were in lockdown. And even as we moved through May, June, July of 2020, there was a staggered reopening of different markets across the country. So still a large part of our store portfolio was closed. We had to figure out how we could generate not just volume, but more volume than we had ever done through our online business and also through the few stores that had reopened to begin with. As I say, we had inventory for over 700 stores, and at times, we only had a handful open, and then it was 20, and then 50, and then 100, 150. But what we were able to do between my first board meeting, where we didn't know if there would be a second, but there was a second board meeting a quarter later. By the time we got to the second board meeting, we had more cash on our balance sheet than we had had for years, because we recognized that we were not going to be able to just cut expenses as a way to keep afloat. We were going to have to start selling a lot more, and we were going to have to start selling a lot more of stuff that people wanted to buy. And the conundrum we were in that could have led to real inertia in the company was that we're predominantly a dress business, get up and go out and party, and none of that was happening. And so we had to pivot the assortment to start selling things that would generate revenue and profitability very quickly, that people wanted to buy. So, we started selling a line of blue light glasses. We started selling a lot of face masks, and anything that you could put on this part of your body. And as such, we completely pivoted. The team did a great job of pivoting the assortment to be very much wear now, as we say in the industry. That helped us. But in the process, we rebuilt our P&L. We recognized that we had a top line issue. We rebuilt a brand and an aesthetic, and we learned a ton about our customer, recognizing that we had only appealed to a very small fraction of the end users that we could provide for her. And we managed to increase our share of wallet fairly substantially with existing customers. We didn't have the cash to acquire new ones, so we just had to figure out how we sold more to the ones that we did have. And that was a pretty successful undertaking, and got the ball rolling and created momentum, which drove a momentum of cultural change in the organization around follow the data, have a vision, follow the data, right? And if you do the right thing by the customer, there is business to be made. And let's be a retailer. Let's do what we are here to do, which is retail.
Amazing. What do you think the turnaround would have looked like if the pandemic didn't happen?
We'd probably still be in a room or doing some kind of off-site retreat that we were paying too much money for, with a big whiteboard and lots of sticky things, but we wouldn't have tried anything. And I think the difference was that the pandemic forced us to try something, anything, get some stuff wrong, but the stuff that seemed to resonate, we then managed to work with and iterate. And I think from that became, a way of working for us at the company, which was strategically, we've got lots of good ideas, but those ideas will never increase enterprise value or generate EBITDA unless we try them. And so I think probably we've definitely taken those ingredients, and they have remained with us as we have exited the pandemic, exited a Chapter 11 reorganization, and we are now a very different business under private ownership, but trying new things and failing or scaling very quickly, I think has definitely remained with us and has been a real unlock in the culture.
I like what you said about trying new things and ingredients, and it makes me think of cooking, which is an analogy I like to use in a lot of the consulting we're doing when we're doing digital transformations, because when you're transforming, there really isn't a recipe you could follow. You have to try new things, and the whole process of transforming is coming up with new recipes. You mentioned, in a crisis situation, you have to be dynamic. What are some innovations you've discovered along the way in both your organizations? Pat, Popchips, you innovated a whole snacking industry. It's a huge industry. What are some of the innovations you've discovered along the way?
Well, I mean, a couple all, come to mind. One is, we've been talking a little bit about people, and I'd say one is very much the power of team and culture. It works both ways, good or bad. It'll accelerate or retard, where your growth trajectory. The companies I see that stress a very high priority on culture and hire into culture, they adapt to change and ramp much faster than others. But I'll give you one kind of very, tactical example. When we launched Popchips, we're like, okay, great, we got this great product, great packaging. The retailers are excited to try it. We start getting it into different accounts, and we're thrilled. And then lo and behold, to get it to the retailers, you have to use a distributor, and they're snack food distributors. And it turns out they're terrible. There's no national solution, a lot of little regional guys. They don't, prioritize your product because you're the new kid on the block, a lot of out of stocks. So we weren't selling as much as we needed to, not because nobody wanted our product, but because it wasn't on the shelf. And we would hear from people, yeah, that's just, we'd say, what can we do about this? And, the answer that came back is, well, that's just the way the industry is. These snack food distributors are all terrible, most of them. And we weren't a, $500 million profitable company that could just accept it. We had to fix it, or we were not going to make it. And so we started to look around and said, who are the most successful distributors? Well, beer distributors. Okay, well, let's go to beer distributors. No, everybody said, they'll never talk to you. They distribute beer. Why would they carry snacks? And we thought about it, and we said, well, they're distributing really heavy stuff. Their trucks weigh out before they cube out, meaning there's too much weight. They can't put any more stuff, even though there's air space on the truck. Well, we were selling air. Popchips was air, very light. So our pitch to them was, hey, we're the golden case. It's something that can go on your trucks when nothing else can. It's incremental revenue. And, the first 5 beer distributors said no, but then a couple did, and it worked. And we ended up creating a very non-traditional distribution network, which at the time was very rare. Now it's very common. Other people started to do more of that. But at the time, we were forced to rethink this. It was a crisis of a different sort, and to, innovate in distribution.
Great example. Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't think a lot of people are thinking out of the box on what the distribution challenges are. And that whole air value proposition falls in line with the Popchip value proposition too. It fits really well. For you, Andrew, what were some of the innovations that Francesca's that you keep dear to your heart that came out as a new recipe in the retail industry for you guys?
Yeah, so I think that similar to Pat, we were trying to figure out something that there probably wasn't a pre-established answer to. What we knew was that for the first time ever as an organization, we were having to operate through a screen and trying to operate more successfully than we had done in person prior to the pandemic, right? And I think probably a byproduct of the way we were having to work through Zoom and Microsoft Teams and whatever was that we innovated the way we functioned internally. We became a real-time organization. Lots of retailers in our space talk about that, and we ourselves had talked about it previously, but we'd never really been successful. And I think what we realized was, through a screen you can do that. You haven't got to get a ton of people in different meeting rooms and run decisions up and down the flagpole. Basically, in Microsoft Teams, there are no corporate titles anymore. You just get the right people in the right boxes on the screen, and those people that can take a decision, by the end of your 20-minute, half an hour, sometimes 10-minute calls. And so I think there was innovation internally in the way we operated. And then externally, we innovated, art and science. We sell a product that is, inherently it's fashion and it's taste, it's an emotional engagement. But behind that, you need data to measure your effectiveness in the way that you deliver that product to market. And in the data, what we saw was that we had a customer during the pandemic that was getting a lot younger, because we were exploiting the digital channel. And we also saw in the data that almost all of our new customers were coming in through digital, and they were overwhelmingly on the youngest end of the profile that we had been targeting previously. And it got us to looking into the data to see how young and where the clusters were. And what we realized was we had an opportunity to broaden the reach of the brand. And long story short, we ended up actually, I think it was around July last year, July 2020, there was a headline on the retail press that said that a really large national tweenwear retailer was headed into Chapter 11, and we were just pleased to still be alive at that point. But what it said to us was, wow, there's $1 billion plus hole in the market that's potentially opening up. And we have this data that suggests maybe we share a customer with this retailer. And 100 days later, a new brand was born, tweenwear. We launched it online in time for holiday last year, great success. And since then we've been scaling it. And in time for holiday this year, our tweenwear brand, Frankie, will launch as a standalone retail concept in physical stores, and with its own standalone website in time for holiday this year. So we generated a whole new revenue stream.
Amazing. And what was really amazing for me watching you at work and Francesca's making the transformations it did, is just how quickly, you guys had 700 retail stores, thousands of employees, and just how quickly you were able to navigate that. I don't think the company would have been able to do that without you leading the charge and making decisions along the way, daily, weekly. So the rate at how fast you guys transformed, I think, really had to do with you being there leading it. I also wrote down something. You said in Zoom and team meetings, there are no titles. Is that why like a lot of CEOs with a lot of ego, they don't like showing up on Zoom? That's a good one.
I have no idea, but I really do think it's affected our corporate structure for the better, in the sense that we feel less like a corporate operation. We feel like a bunch of like-minded individuals who are really passionate as retailers about delivering the best thing we can for the collective that is our customer today. And as such, I think some of the more traditional corporate operations just don't get in the way, right? And getting CEO sign-off, whatever that means, that's kind of like that's an instantaneous concept in our company. Albeit we're not a 700 store company now, but we've got almost 500 stores still. and we've got a fast growing online business. We are profitable, and and the business is growing quickly. But we've managed to keep some of that scrappiness. I think that that's been an unlock for us.
Yeah, I like that word, scrappiness. What do you guys think? And would love to hear from you first, Pat. What do you guys think is the single most important thing for the company going through so much change to build?
I mean, in a word, culture. If the culture is siloed and dysfunctional, good luck navigating the change. Because if your company is of any kind of scale whatsoever, even medium size, there's nothing of any significance that could be accomplished by any one individual. It generally takes a collective group of the team. But if your culture is healthy, and by the way, I've seen numerous different kinds of healthy culture models. It's not just one. But if it's healthy, then that helps the team participate in the change, adapt to change, speed change, etc.
In a crisis situation, people tend to be reactive and they freeze up, from the fear, right? How do you manage culture during a crisis? Andrew, how did you manage that? I mean, you did it so effortlessly. At least that's how it appeared, from people that were working with you. How did you manage that?
Well, that's kind of you to say, but I think what you saw and are responding to is what I felt was the most important thing during the crisis. I agree with Pat, it was culture, but my firm belief that the culture emanates from the top. And so the temperature of the organization, like if you're in a crisis, by its very nature, it's a very dynamic situation, and people will look to leadership, and ultimately they'll look to the CEO. And if the CEO is calm, collected, seemingly on the surface, that will emanate throughout the organization. It allows you to take decisions using your head as well as maybe your heart, but not in panic, And I think that was a big learning for me, was how to stay calm, to keep the teams focused, knowing inside that we were running out of money, knowing inside that, there could be thousands of people that lose their jobs. And make no mistake, we had to make some cuts. But, my focus was on preserving the maximum amount of jobs possible. And the way to do that was keep the team focused on executing and iterating on a day-to-day basis. And had I panicked and freaked out, I think it would have freaked out the organization. And, we would have lost time in that, as I said earlier, that inertia of, worrying about the what ifs. And we knew what the what if was. It was, we're either here or we're not. Okay, so now let's plan and work as if we're going to be here, and let's get on and do stuff that's going to ensure the future of the company. And that stayed with us throughout 2020, even as we were trying to refinance the business and we were trying to close some stores, which ultimately we ended up having to do through a Chapter 11 reorganization. But keeping the teams focused, I remember on the day I got everybody on a Teams chat to say, to announce to them that we were going to file for Chapter 11, but took the time to explain why we were going to do it and why it was the right option for the company at that timing, and that there were no other options. And this was our way of saving the company and as many jobs as possible. And the teams rallied behind that. And, our future investors felt that as they got closer to the company, that there was a team with heart and passion and a reason to exist. And we're very fortunate that they bought into that. Our new owners bought into that, and ultimately that, that set up a new foundation for the relationship with our new owners as we became a new company at the beginning of 2021.
Got it. Great insights. Pat, how have you seen the pandemic affect other companies you're currently advising or on the board?
Yeah, it is, really one of two ways. There are those that have, taken license, if you will, from the crisis the pandemic created to make, in some cases, radical change that went, frankly, beyond the crisis itself into just the core of the business. And as that, one example of the Canadian equipment manufacturer I gave you earlier, coming out of the pandemic stronger than even before the pandemic. But unfortunately, many times more companies I see have made very timid, what I call defensive changes during COVID, and are coming out in a weaker position than when they started, not really kind of addressing some of the fundamental issues that most growth businesses have. And you either, deal with them in a very straightforward head-on way, or when you try to kind of sidestep them through defensive maneuvers, generally it doesn't turn out so well.
Great, thanks for that. Question for you, Andrew. How are you thinking about technology structure to support the growth initiatives?
Yeah, well, I think probably what I've just described in the last few minutes is, we're a company that has been through a lot of upheaval, reorganization, and, a pretty dynamic 18 months behind us. But we're building for the future, and we are in growth mode. And as such, we've got some foundational work that needs to be done. Unfortunately, our technology and our IT infrastructure is a product of a company that hasn't had the means to invest in recent years. And, we were fortunate to partner with Pandoblox to help create the roadmap. We had, and I remember you and I talking about this, Henry, I had the vision of where I wanted to get to, but the technology involved in order to deliver the stuff we wanted to deliver for our customers, like that, we needed more skill set and expertise at the table than we had internally. And we needed it for very specific steps along the way along our journey. And you guys were able to provide very specific, tailored support at the point at which we needed it. You need to look at your tech stack and think about the foundational systems and what has to be done there. And, and then from that, you build a roadmap to deliver the customer-facing solutions that you want over time. You were able to walk us through that. And I think about our tech stack and our IT requirements as being something that will be never ending. It will require constant investment because we've got to leapfrog a few years to catch up, but we'll always be playing catch up with a competitor who's got a better idea or a better solution. And so I see the support that we need as needing to be very flexible. And we don't want to own that necessarily. I think we now have learned we're good at being a retailer. We're not in the business of being a tech company, but we want to partner with individuals who can find us the tech companies that can deliver the sort of solutions we need to deliver. And Pandoblox has been very helpful there.
No, thank you for the plug. I really appreciate it, Andrew. And from what we went through with Francesca's, the speed to which we were able to get that roadmap done was faster than we've ever seen it anywhere else. And we know it's because you were involved and we were actually in stand-up meetings with you, going through it week by week. We got it done so quickly. But thank you very much for that. And I think this is the case for a lot of companies going through digital transformations. You have to be dynamic. Francesca's had a lot of great resources, but you couldn't look at it the same way that other retailers do. We really had to get your input on where you wanted to take the company and get that business vision to figure out how to use the resources. And that there were a lot of tremendous resources there that we were able to repurpose in that roadmap and design. But thank you for that plug-in. There's a question here that I'd like to get around to, which is around culture. Pat, you talk a lot about culture, and I know that's your focus right now with your board advisory. I've heard you mention time and time again that your most highest performing companies really focusing on culture. How do you decide how to focus strategy to improve culture? Like, how do what's some of the decision-making thought processes you have around culture, and how do you define when it needs improvement? And
Sure. I mean, I'll answer the last question first because it's pretty straightforward. How do you know when you need to change culture? There was a college classmate of mine named Patrick Lencioni, and he wrote a very famous book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Yeah. It's got to be one of the fastest reads of any book because it's more of a story than a textbook. But in the appendix, there's actually a culture test. It's a very short, simple test. You can give it to your direct reports, and it literally tells you if you have a culture problem. So that is one very easy way. I've actually done it with multiple companies, and it tends to work very well. But the real question, the tougher one you asked is, how do you then determine that culture, and how do you focus strategy to improve culture? I would say it's more the other way around. You determine what your culture is, and that becomes your North Star as you are working your way through strategy. Andrew said something very important earlier, that he has a collection of like-minded individuals. So, any leader, it's CEO, a founder, you're going to have your own North Star and your own style of what makes you effective. And it's important that you're incorporating those principles because, as Andrew brought up, people are going to look at the CEO, and if they're not walking the walk, nobody's going to buy into any kind of culture on a piece of paper. So it needs to be authentic, number one. And number two, that, it can take many different forms. I've seen some that are very mercenary and some that are very holistic, and they can all work. At that point, it becomes more of a North Star towards working through your strategy as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, leading from the front, from a culture standpoint, I definitely know you guys both have that style, and culture is very important. Have you seen like a different style to leading culture where the CEO is leading from the back but still gets the culture going? Have you seen that, Pat, like with some of the other companies that have been successful, or has it always been the CEO leading the culture charge?
Generally, I mean, I've seen where the employees and key managers can be very much involved in the setting of that culture, but the founder and CEO is generally the orchestra leader. Now, once that culture is set, I've seen cultures where the CEO is not driving every decision. The team is driving those decisions, but that's different than setting the culture.
Got it. yeah, the CEO founder has to set the culture, and then other could carry it on. But it's getting that first momentum going that's so key for the CEO founder. There's another question here for Andrew. It seems like one conclusion from your description of Francesca's gave you real velocity for change. Once past the crisis, is it possible to retain that velocity for change, or do strategies revert back to a more measured approach, long-term strategies?
That's a good question. I'd say yes and no, and both are important. So retaining that speed and that connectivity with delivering a solution for a customer in real time, I think that we are learning can be embedded and can make you more successful. But one of the things that we are still learning to deal with and to evolve, I think, is evolving out of this like crisis mode is actually quite hard. To get back to seasonal planning, like annual financial planning, like there is a tendency amongst the team to only want to navigate kind of as far as the end of their noses, which was absolutely the right way to get us through the pandemic. But now we've got to build the growth strategies, and we have done, but managing to them and keeping eyes on the horizon and getting, to a certain extent, some of the more senior members of the team, their eyes out of the day-to-day is a real challenge. I'll start with myself. I have to keep constantly reminding myself to stop taking the lead in the operational meetings, because I've now got a team. We have a certain amount of stability in our company and organization. It's not about stepping back, but I think it's about recognizing that we all have a different role to play in the growth strategy, and mine is not the ideas generator, like in the moment, in real time with the teams. That I've got great teams with great ideas, and as the CEO, I need to become a little bit more of an arbitrator and a facilitator to get those ideas together. I don't know whether that answers the question, but yeah, it's tough. But I do think you need to evolve, and there's some good stuff to keep as well.
Yeah, it's really hard to shift from coming up with new recipes, being in the trenches and innovating, and then pulling back and thinking long-term strategy. Definitely feel you on that. Pat, did you have any insight to that you want to talk about?
No, I thought that was well put, Andrew. I changed my mind. I guess I do. I think I was just ruminating on what you're saying, Andrew. Is you jump in and you led a crisis situation effectively, and you had to do certain things, but then knowing when you needed to pull back because your team actually was embracing the very principles that you were trying to embed in them and give them the freedom to run with it. That's easier said than done. I've had the similar challenges in my businesses, but again, that's where culture can come in. If you have a culture of open communication, your direct reports can be comfortable telling you, I think you need to back off now, Pat. We've got this.
Yeah. I tend to describe that to the team as, listen, we're creating a truth-telling culture here. And that very much is one where you can tell me to butt out. If you've got it, then that's great. What ultimately should preoccupy my time now is, are we going to deliver the EBITDA result? Not are we going to get from today to tomorrow or from today to the end of the week? Is, are we on track for our annual goals? And that is a constant reminder for me in any case.
Yeah, and I think it proves to both of your cultures that you've led in your companies that employees would be able to tell you to butt out, and you guys say, oh, "Okay, cool, thanks, you got this," right? I
Yeah.
don't think a lot of corporate culture allows that really. I wanted to wrap up with some wrapping thoughts here. We got a minute left. Thank you for all the questions. If anyone here wants to get involved in future conversations, please reach out. Would love to engage you. Some closing thoughts to this is, as we were talking through how to navigate the crisis, I kept on seeing parallels with digital transformations. It's any form of transformation is very dynamic. And it's very much like navigating through a crisis situation, because a lot of people don't know what to do because there is no formula in place that you could follow. There's no recipe in place you have to follow. And so it's about creating an environment where, everyone, including the technology teams, can be involved in coming up with new recipes and innovating and coming up with new ideas and whatnot. And getting that culture is really hard to do, especially with a lot of technologists who are more introverted, who look at time more from an event standpoint, and can easily lose track of time. And so as we were talking through this, I just kept seeing so many parallels of how digital transformations are so important to build that culture. Invite the technology teams in to help innovate. And a lot of leaders, they don't know what the North Star is. They don't know what the goal is of the company. And it's really important to have the CEO lead that charge. And so really appreciate you guys sharing your experience here and sharing your wisdom with us. For future conversations, we're going to discuss how digital transformations affect company culture, and whether your company culture is ready for a digital transformation. Pat and Pandoblox is actually working on a series of self-answer questions to see if companies are ready for a digital transformation, and whether your company's got the right culture in place to be able to make that digital transformation effective. We think that that's a really big reason why digital transformations fail. So I would love to share that with you guys and get you involved in the next event. But thank you all. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Pat. Learned so much, and would love to collaborate with you further. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Henry.
Thanks for having us, Andrew.
Thanks, Pat.
Thanks, Andrew.